I'm one of the co-directors with John Hildebrand of the Scripps Center for Marine Archaeology at UC San Diego. This is our fourth SCMA lecture this year, and we hope this is a kind of a post-COVID situation. I want to thank our colleague, Professor Isabel Rivera Cayazo, for organizing the SCMA Lecture Series this year, and our graduate student, Lauren Clark, for volunteering to run all the logistics behind the program. I'm especially pleased to welcome our speaker today, Professor Deborah Cvikel of the Department of Maritime Civilizations at the University of Haifa in Israel. It's 2 p.m. here in Borrego Springs, California, and it's midnight in Israel. And it's Shabbat, so let's let Debbie get started. But before we do, I want to give some background. Debbie is an associate professor who's an extremely accomplished field worker in underwater archaeology.
One of these guys that was
peer-reviewed publication, mentoring graduate students, and more. Debbie has had a remarkable career directing and co-directing over 25 underwater expeditions off the coast of Israel. These include the Akko Tower Wreck, the Atlit Underwater Survey, Apollonia in the southern part of Israel, the Dor 2002 and 2006 shipwrecks in the Dor Lagoon, the Akko 1 shipwreck, Atlit Yam, and more. Debbie's long-term underwater excavation has been the Ma'agan Mikhael B shipwreck off the coast of Kibbutz Ma'agan Mikhael, and this will be the topic of today's talk. Debbie has received an impressive number of grants from the Israel Science Foundation, the University of Haifa's Research Authority, the Honor Frost Foundation, the Institute of Nautical Archaeology at Texas A&M University, and more. Debbie has a strong publication record with numerous peer-reviewed papers and monographs. SCMA has a strong research connection with the University of Haifa, thanks in part to a generous 3-year grant from the Koret Foundation in San Francisco. This grant supports grad students, postdocs, expeditions, a joint Haifa-UCSD Marine Archaeology Research Station in Akko, and more. Today's talk is entitled The Ma'agan Mikhael B Shipwreck in Israel, the ship, the cargo, the crew. The ship dates to the 7th and 8th centuries AD and provides a unique window on the intersection of the Christian and early Islamic worlds in the Eastern Mediterranean. And just last week, Debbie's team was in the international news shortly after they published some of their research from the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck concerning dead rats found on the ancient shipwreck that provided clues to voyages over 1,400 years ago. And I hope we get to hear about those rats today. So please join me in giving Debbie a warm welcome, virtual. Debbie, it's all yours.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to present to you the Ma'agan Mikhael B shipwreck. We will begin with the short presentation of how the ship was discovered, the excavations, the ship itself, the cargo, and what we know so far about the crew. This is an ongoing excavation, so there is still much we don't know and still much more to discover. So Ma'agan Mikhael is located about 30 kilometers south of Haifa, where the University of Haifa is. And this place is worldwide known for the discovery of the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck dated to the end of the 5th century BCE which was excavated and studied by Elisha Linder and Yaakov Kahanov, which were my academic ancestors. This is the ship as it is on display at the Hecht Museum at the University of Haifa. In 2005, two divers from kibbutz Ma'agan Mikhael, you see here the kibbutz, the fish ponds, and the sea. They returned from a recreational dive and reported to the IAA that they saw a pile of stones, which were not local stones, some timber emerging, and some pottery remains. This site, the Ma'agan Mikhael B, is just 150 meters south of the original 5th century BCE Ma'agan Mikhael ship. So once the site was reported, it was again covered with sand and not found. 10 years later, we conducted a sub-bottom profiler survey together with colleagues from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, and 3 sites were located. What you see here is designated as D with a question mark. This is the site of the original, of the one and only Ma'agan Mikhael. B is what was later designated as Ma'agan Mikhael B, which is the subject of our talk today. And C with the question mark is something yet to be discovered, perhaps the site of another ship. In August 2015, we conducted, following the sub-bottom profiler survey, we conducted a water jetting survey. So of course, the first day was very frustrating, difficult sea conditions, and nothing was found. The second day, first hit in the water, we found, as you can see here, traces of rope, wood from 2 different species, and pine cones, many pine cones. So we said, okay, there is something here. And of course, the samples were sent for C14 dating to see what is the dating of this ship. And the ship is dated between the mid-7th century to the mid-8th century CE, which is the end of the Byzantine era and the beginning of the Islamic rule in this region of the Eastern Mediterranean. Later, we've learned, once we studied the ship, that based on some of the amphoras which were discovered, the typology of these amphoras reinforced the C14 results. So once we had the C14 analysis, I have something here popping from Zoom, just a second, let's see, sorry. So once we had the dating of the ship, it was the question of why excavated, why the importance of this shipwreck. And to shortly describe we are in a cross-section of the change in ship construction technique. While the Ma'agan Mikhael ship, and you see here an example from Ma'agan Mikhael 2, which is the replica of the 5th century BCE Ma'agan Mikhael, ships were constructed shell first, which means that the shell was constructed first, and each hull plank was connected to the next one using pegged mortise and tenon joints. And only later the internal parts were inserted. While we know of the Sercha Limani, which was until quite recently the only example of a shipwreck dated to the 11th century BC, where we first see a ship which is constructed based on the frames. So the frames were established first, and only later the hull planks were connected to the pre-existing frames. Somewhere in between, around the 5th, 6th century apparently, we have evidence of the change beginning to occur. the change, the transformation, the transition in ship construction from shell construction to frame-based. Since the Ma'agan Mikhael B, MMB, is located in 7th, 8th century, this was an incentive to excavate this shipwreck and see where it stands in the transition in ship construction. We thought, okay, we are arriving into Ma'agan Mikhael. For me personally, it was like sort of a closure where Yaakov Kahanov, who was my professor, began his career as a nautical archaeologist. And 30 years later, I returned to the same site to excavate a different shipwreck. So it might look very romantic in the photos, but actually it is a very challenging site to excavate. Although it is shallow, there is the site, as you can see here, this is where the ship is located, is a meeting point between a local current created by this island, this small island, and also the current running from south to north. Sorry, from north to south. So very challenging area, especially for a sailing ship trying to maneuver in this water, and for us as divers trying to excavate this site. So although we conducted so far 7 seasons of underwater excavations out of 3 or 4 weeks, which were dedicated to each season, we eventually were able to excavate for a maximum of a week, and that's in a good season. Our camp is located on the shore of the site with special permission from the kibbutz and of course all other authorities. We have 2 containers. One is the office, the other is the maritime workshop with all the diving equipment you can see here, and the piles, hundreds of sandbags to cover the site after each excavation season. So in spite of the challenging conditions, we have accomplished not too bad results so far. This is what the site looked like after the September 2017 season. And this is what it looked like after the October 2018. This is the bow area of the ship. And we have here the masthead. I'll show you some more details later. And everything you see here was covered by dozens of amphorae. This is where we stand today after 7 seasons of underwater excavations. You see here at the stern, we still have many more amphoras to retrieve in order to study the wooden components. And we have this area between midship and the stern yet to be uncovered and studied in detail. So there is much more work to be done in the near future. So what do we have so far? This is the Ma'agan Mikhael B shipwreck, a total length of 19.6 meters from the bow here to the stern, and a maximum width of 4.9 meters. In red, you see here at the center, roughly at the center, the masthead and its reinforcing timbers. We have CLT, a central longitudinal timber here in green, one at the bow, one at the stern of the ship. In blue, you have the framing timber, hull planks, and you can see here in pink, stringers. So one thing which is obvious when we look at the ship, at the different timbers, we see a great deal of investment in the construction of the ship. So high quality wooden components and high level of carpentry. So someone took the time in order to construct this ship, to take care of each and every little detail. And please note also the dimensions of the shipwreck itself. I mean, other shipwrecks of this period, which were previously excavated, for example, in Dorton Tulara Lagoon, were about 11, 12 meters long, the shipwreck themselves, and the reconstructed size of the ships was between 16 and 17 meters long. So this shipwreck is exceptional in its dimensions and as a shipwreck, and we will see later also as far as the reconstruction is concerned. So a little bit about the different ship components. We were able to see a little bit of the keel from the inside of the ship. So we know it is about 18 centimeters wide. We are still to find out, is there a rabbet in the keel for the garboard? We have an argument about this. I think I saw a rabbet for the garboard, but this is still uncertain and needs to be rechecked. We have a scarf here between the keel and a gripe, which is a connecting timber to the stem at the bow of the ship. The end post, the stem, and the stern post were composed from 2 timbers each. The lower timber, as we can see here, we see the stem. The lower timber is made of walnut. The upper timber is from pine. And there is a very nice, very elegant scarf, kind of a Jupiter scarf, connecting those 2 timbers together. And also, at the stern, the upper component did not survive, but we see only the lower component of the stern. At the bow, at the stern, next to the stem and the stern post, there were also reinforcing timbers, roughly logs, which were nicely worked and shaped to support these areas in the ship. At the starboard side of the ship, we have about 60 framing timbers, and at the starboard and at the port side, we have about 70 framing timbers. Their sided dimension is about 13 centimeters. These are the average dimensions, molded about 12 centimeters with a room and space measured along the central longitudinal timber of about 44 centimeters. All the framing timbers, except for 2, were made from walnut. The 2 exceptional ones were made from different species of oak. Perhaps this was a repair, but there are no indication on this side of the ship for any repair which was conducted. In several incidents, we found on the hull planks evidence for the existence of top timbers. So we know the ship continued further upwards than what we found so far. The dimensions, the sided dimensions of those top timbers was also similar to that of the other framing timbers. It was about 12, 13 centimeters sided. The framing timbers were very nicely worked. We see evidence of tool marks, as you can see here, and a thick layer of coating material, which was painted on the framing timbers and basically on all the timbers, all the internal components of the ship. One of the things I find interesting that we found in this coating material are the remains of a case of cockroaches. We have plenty of cockroaches, especially in the stern area of the ship. You can see here, as well as different kinds of beetles. We think that maybe that once the coating was painted on the ship, it was still wet, and different insects were caught in this coating material, and now we are studying them together with experts who can tell which kind of beetles these were, and of course, if we can study something about the cockroaches. So it's a different aspects of how those little things might teach us something new about this shipwreck. On top of the framing timbers, there were central longitudinal timbers, one at the bow and one at the stern. The one at the stern was about 5 meters long, and at the stern it was about 6 meters long. Here we see this central longitudinal timber, which was located at the bow of the ship. And at the bottom of the central longitudinal timber, we have recesses to accommodate the framing timbers below, and it was fastened to them using iron bolts. The hull planks of the ship were made from fir. They were roughly 18 centimeters wide and about 3 to 4 centimeters thick, and were connected to the framing timbers with iron nails. You can see here the heads of the iron nails. About 2 iron nails from one hull plank to each frame. At the ends of the ship, at the bow, at the stern, we found scorch marks on the hull planks. We think perhaps this is evidence of char bending at the ends of the ship, perhaps to enable the convergence of the bow and stern. From each side of the longitudinal axis of the keel, we found at least 4 stringers at the starboard and 4 stringers at the port side. The stringers were made from fir, half logs of fir, also very nicely worked and shaped, and covered with a thick layer of probably the same type of coating material as the one which was found on the framing timbers. On one of the stringers, we found several inscriptions. You can see some examples. These are all taken from the same, different areas on the same stringers. On the same stringer, sorry, Greek letters, symbols, here pi, maybe an anchor, and these are all carved on the timber. And we have the word Allah, which was burned on the timber. So on a single timber, we have this nice combination of Greek letters, symbols, and Arabic letters. Arabic words. This is only a single example. We have other examples of timbers in the ship which were inscribed with Greek letters, or we think we might have also another Arabic inscription on one of the framing timbers, but this is something we still need to study. We also try to explain, we have no explanation so far for these symbols or letters. Perhaps the carpenter, perhaps crew members who could write their initial to leave a mark behind. But it is one of the things I like very much about this ship. It enables us to touch the people who were there before. At the bow and the stern, we have also bulkheads, which were used to create compartments in the ship. And also they give us an indication that if we have a bulkhead, perhaps at the bow and at the stern, there was a small deck. Of course, at the stern, we need a deck in order to enable the helmsman to handle the rudders, and at the bow for maneuvering, for handling the anchor. So the existence of the bulkheads supports this. The bulkheads were made from fir, a combination of fir and pine. So whatever wood they had available. See this nice picture with 2 PhD students, Ma'agan Mikhael and Michelle Kreischer. We have at least 2 PhDs on this shipwreck alone, and several MA theses on different topics. Roughly at the center of the ship, part of the masthead was found with part of its support. There is a single buttress. We haven't excavated yet the port side to see if we have another buttress. You see it is all covered with dozens of amphoras, which we need to retrieve in order to see if we have another buttress. This is the masthead. The end of the masthead facing the bow is covered with a nicely worked matting. And at the masthead, we found two recesses here, a long one and a smaller one facing the bow. So based on the slope which was found in the larger recess, we were able to reconstruct the direction of the bow of the ship towards the east, and actually the stern of the ship is towards the west. So the ship was facing the shore when it sank. We believe that the larger recess was used for the mast heel, and the smaller one was for some sort of a support or a stanchion to support the mast itself. There is also a recess in the buttress itself, perhaps also to accommodate some sort of support to the mast. The shape of this mast resembles other examples which were found in shipwrecks roughly from the same period, such as the masthead of Saint-Gervais, which is dated to the 7th century. This was excavated in France. So the length and the dimensions are roughly similar, but as you can see, the shape, this masthead is more rectangular in cross-section. But please note it is placed on two stringers, which is supported. And another example which came to mind is the masthead of the Tantura F shipwreck, not far from Ma'agan Mikhael, located at Tantura Lagoon. However, this masthead is significantly shorter, only about 1.5 meters long, and this ship is reconstructed to have been smaller, about 16 or 17 meters long. But once the masthead of Tantura F was flipped, you can see here also it was supported on two stringers and it was movable. So in a way similar to the masthead we found in Ma'agan Mikhael B. However, the shape, the cross-section of the masthead of Ma'agan Mikhael B is more what we describe as mushroom-shaped. You can see here, this area here was placed between the two stringers, and still it could have been moved or changed according to the need. Of course, not while the ship was sailing, perhaps in port, if there was a need due to the cargo to keep the ship nicely balanced. This is the hook-shaped masthead, which was found in this shipwreck. And as far as I am concerned, this is the most amazing find we have from this ship. To be as modest as possible, this is the only find of its kind which was found so far. There is another hook-shaped masthead which was found in the Black Sea. It is smaller in dimensions and it was found out of context. So this one was found inside the ship. It is made from a single piece of walnut. And just imagine, take a second to imagine the carpentry work. It is so nicely shaped. And you can see here the two sheaves which were used for the halyard in order to lift the yard and to support the sail. This part here, this recess, was probably inserted into the head of the mast. And at the front of the masthead, we also have two letters inscribed in Greek. We don't know, maybe it's to indicate the the forward part, the bow, perhaps it's the initials of the carpenter who made this piece. We don't know. You can see here nicely the tool marks. It's a very nicely shaped piece, about 80 centimeters long. We have iconography iconographical evidence for the existence of this type of hook-shaped masthead. For example, on an aphra dated to the 9th century from Yenikapi, which was studied by Nergis Wensenin and Eric Reed. And of course, the famous mosaic, which was studied by the late Professor Patrice Poumey. And you can see here at the end of the mast, this is the mosaic from Kelanderis. At the end of the mast, there is the hook-shaped masthead. So this hook-shaped masthead is actually the only evidence we have so far that all this iconographic evidence are correct, that there was indeed a hook-shaped masthead at the top of the mast in this period. Not far from the masthead and the masthead, which were all found roughly in the same location, we had coils of ropes and various rigging elements. You can see here turning blocks and 3-sheave block. And one of the blocks here was found still with some of the rope remains. And we think these are all related to the rigging of the ship. We believe that based on the shape of the masthead and the existence of the hook-shaped masthead, that the ship carried a lateen sail. And we hope that using the rigging elements we have so far and the ones which we hope to discover further, to be able to reconstruct how this sail was handled. So based on the evidence we have so far, we suggest to reconstruct the ship as a lateen-rigged merchantman, about 25 meters long. And of course, the length of a yard in a lateen-rigged ship would be more or less the length of the ship, a beam of about 7 meters, and the height of the mast about 17 meters. This is, of course, what we think so far. With each excavation season, we have a new detail, we learn something new, and we change the dimensions slightly. Why do we think this was a merchantman? Well, in the first seasons, with each season, as the ship was exposed, the amount of amphora discovered was quite impressive. We have at least 200. We have at least 200, sorry, and still counting. We know, we are aware it's not as impressive amount as was found, for example, in the Yasiyada shipwreck. However, for a shipwreck excavated in our area in Israel, this is the largest maritime cargo to be discovered so far. And I will show you in a little bit, as you can see here in the slide. We have different kinds of other vessels as well. So it's not only the pottery, but many other vessels. Some of them we haven't found any parallels so far. But out of all the different types of vessels, we have only one lamp, a single lamp, which was found so far. This one here. We have a nice amount of tablewares, mostly of Egyptian origin, bowls, plates, jugs. See this very nice. We have a nice collection of these small closed jars which were found in the stern area. We don't know what they were used for. We thought perhaps these were lamps or incense burner, but there was no scorch mark, no sign of previously being used, and we haven't found any parallels to these so far. We have water jugs, 4 water jugs. 2 were found in each side of the ship, at the bow and at the stern. Sorry. We think because of the pale color, maybe it was used to keep the water cool and was used as drinking water for the crew. Of the amphoras discovered so far, we were able to identify 8 different types. 6 of them were typologically classified. About half of the amphoras still contained the original content, mainly agricultural goods such as olives, raisins. Some of the olives, you can see here the pits. Some of the olives were found still complete with the fruit, so we could actually eat them. Raisins, walnuts, figs, dates. We think some of this, the majority was of course cargo, some was probably cruise supplies. In several amphoras, we found this yellowish material. Perhaps it was resin. It is still being analyzed, and we hope to have the results soon. So all was probably produced and packaged at the same place where the amphoras were also produced. However, we might have some exceptions because the walnuts were found in walnuts which grow in cooler areas were found in amphoras which were manufactured in Egypt. So how do we explain the existence of, let's say, Turkish walnuts in an Egyptian amphora on a shipwreck at Ma'agan Mikhael? This is one of the questions we still have to answer. We have about 24 different types of inscriptions on the amphoras. The majority is in Arabic, mainly blessings like Bismillah in the name of the Lord or Allah, but some inscriptions we were unable to read. And it was not myself who was trying to read them. We were advised by experts of Arabic language, and we were told that one of the reasons that this is so difficult to read is that at this time, there was still no punctuation marks on Arabic letters. So it's different to differentiate the letters. We are still trying to solve this riddle as well. As you can see here, this inscription is very puzzling. I'm wondering whether it's the name of a merchantman or a destination of the kind of content that was in this amphora. And the second type of inscriptions are symbols or letters in Greek. As you can see here, the cruciform, which was current during the 6th century and was used by churches and monasteries even as far as the 9th century. We have here the combination of the cross and the T. And if you note here on this specific amphora, in addition, we have something else which was written, perhaps in Arabic letters, we don't know. We still haven't found out. We have some amphoras with Greek, what we think are Greek letters, Greek inscriptions, but what is the meaning? We still need to find out. And this nice star, 5-pointed star, which was found also on a single amphora. So the different inscriptions also give us perhaps a hint of maybe a connection with monasteries or the church involved in some sort of commercial ties in the Eastern Mediterranean. We are slowly figuring out what was the loading pattern of these amphoras, how they were arranged in the ship. So we know it was not just a mix all over, but something was very nicely organized in the ship. So at the bow, we have mainly ballast stones. This is the bow area. Next to it, LR5s, which were manufactured mainly in Egypt. Again, LR5s about the center of the ship, and LR2s, late Roman amphoras manufactured in Cyprus. Then we have another area of ballast stones. This you can see it's all in white, so it's still to be discovered, to be studied. A mix of different types. At least one amphora which was found in this area is perhaps of Tunisian origin. We still need to reinsure that, but different types. And then towards the stern, the very end of the ship, we have early Egyptian amphoras, type 1, which were also originated from Egypt. One of the problems we are facing with these amphoras is that they were loaded in at least 3, perhaps even 4 layers. So even if we document and retrieve the upper layer, there is still 1 or 2 layers beneath until we can reach the wooden components and document the hull remains. So where were these amphoras produced? The majority of the amphoras and other vessels, such as the cooking pots and the tablewares, the bowls, is from Egypt. We have the region of Aswan and also the Western Nile Delta. So even if we say Egypt, Egypt is a very large country, so it's not from a single specific location. We have the LR1s and LR2s, which were produced apparently in Cyprus, in the area of Paphos, the Troodos Mountains, but perhaps also some of them was manufactured in other islands in the Aegean Sea. And we have what we call the Gazaware, the LR4, which was until recently designated as Gazaware, but today with all the excavation and the production, the large production center in Yavne, perhaps we can name it Yavneware, I don't know yet. But Gazaware, and we have 2 late Roman 5 amphoras, which were manufactured in Caesarea. So a very nice combination, a variety from all over the Eastern Mediterranean, everything found in a single ship. In addition to the large amount of amphoras, there was a secondary cargo in this ship, much smaller in amount, but still significant in detail. We found over 860 fragments of glass vessels and lumps of raw glass and coulee. At least in our area, where so far raw glass was found, again, at sea, excavated in surveys by Ehud Galili, Dr. Ehud Galili from the Israel Antiquities Authority. This is the first time where we find such a great amount of glassware and raw glass in a shipwreck in this region. And we think it might testify that for some sort of connection between workshop, perhaps in Egypt, perhaps also in this area in Caesarea, in Apollonia, for the recycling of glass to produce new products. Two distinctive glassware objects are two nice bottles, which we think were not for recycling, but for any kind of precious liquid to be used by the crew, by a passenger, by the captain. We don't know yet, but this was not for recycling purposes. So speaking of the captain and the crew, what can we learn about them from the objects, from what we know so far? So next to the bulkhead at the bow, next to the fore bulkhead, we found many clay bricks, as you can see, some of them with burn marks, and all the cooking pots. So we believe that this was perhaps the galley area of the ship. This is a suggested reconstruction. You can see we have the soot marks on the cooking pot. And we think perhaps this was more or less how they used to cook. If you see here in one of the broken amphoras, the remains of olive pits. So some of the agricultural finds were meant for the crew. So here is the nice example of an Egyptian produced amphora, which was found with walnuts, complete walnuts, still edible. We found a sack of carobs, also near what we think was the galley area. Olives, dates, pistachio, pine nuts, perhaps also the remains of fish, all found roughly in this area. And we think this was, the Mediterranean diet. This was what the crew was eating. We are still to discover what was in the cooking pots. We have some burnt remains and we are conducting residue analysis, hoping to shed more light on what they ate while they were sailing. But rats, which are mentioned at the intro to the lecture, will be presented later on. Some of the faunal remains in the shipwreck are rats. We know now that they were found when they were apparently dead, but still a very exciting find for us. We have over 100 skeletal remains of rats, out of which we were able to compose 5 in the bow area here, and a single one which was found complete, the one and only one so far at the stern area. We've sent those rats for analysis and we know that they were kind of healthy. They didn't carry the plague. So we have healthy rats in the bow area, perhaps next to the galley, trying to get their hands on food. But we can learn, many things based on these rats. The analysis shows that 2 of the rats came from somewhere in the western, perhaps central Mediterranean. The closest examples are, the closest specimens come from Corsica, and 4 other rats came from the Levant, southern Levant area. So how did those 2, let's say Corsican West Mediterranean rats came on board the ship? Did they come with the cargo? Did they come when the ship was anchoring somewhere in this area? Still to be discovered. Other faunal remains give us another indication of what the crew was eating while they were sailing. A hind leg of a young ram. I can imagine it, they buying it from a butcher in a market where the ship was anchoring, so the crew could eat meat and not just vegetables. Related to faunal remains, but not as a foodstuff, is this writing tablet, which was made from a camel scapula. We know of camel scapulas being used as writing tablets from other archaeological sites on land. But here we have the first example of a writing tablet, which was found at sea in a shipwreck. This was found next to some of the amphora. We can see here the lines. We have 10 lines incised into the writing tablet, and a hole 5 millimeters in diameters, which was bored into it. So perhaps it was hanged on a string, or perhaps whatever was used for writing was attached to this. We were unable so far with all the analysis we did to find any traces of writing, but this might be that the ink was erased after so many years being underwater. Still, it gives us a strong indication that at least one of the mariners or someone on this ship knew how to write, or at least how to do any kinds of symbols which were related to what was going on in the ship, perhaps to conduct the sale of the amphoras. Other personal items which were found are gaming stones. Perhaps this was what crew members did to pass the time during the sail, played games. And we have at least 3, perhaps 4 wooden combs. The wooden combs are marked. So we know that each crew member perhaps marked his own comb, because this is something you use for, it's a personal item, not something you pass along. The thick teeth were used for the beard, and the smaller ones were used to remove lice. So some sort of an effort to keep oneself in a clean state, to keep the hygiene of the crew members. And what about superstitions? We know, we often hear of mariners being superstitious, and do we have evidence for that on the ship? So we have we found several precious stones. Some of them have, let's say, kind of virtues, perhaps to protect against the evil eye. We have, we have the amethyst, which is the purple one, which according to Pliny gives you protection from spells and from hail. And the malachite, which is the green one, which has virtues of good health and fertility. So we think maybe those were carried by one of the mariners while they were sailing on the ship as good luck charms. And we have this matched pair of ram's horn corns. And one of the questions was, we don't think that any actual butchering took place while the ship was sailing. And if it did happen, there is no need to keep the head or the corns. It was probably butchery waste and being thrown at sea. So why these were kept? And if we look, for example, in the tomb of the bulls in Italy, we know that horn cords have this symbolic meaning as talisman, because they could pierce the evil eye and protect you from it. So perhaps this is our suggestion for now, that these were used as a good luck charm by one of the mariners. To conclude this presentation, so we know so far we know, or we suggest that the Ma'agan Mikhael B shipwreck is the remains of a Latin rig merchantman about 25 meters long, which plied the Eastern Mediterranean sometimes between the mid-7th to the mid-8th century, the transition period between the Byzantine and the Islamic rule in the region. We have trade contacts between Egypt, Cyprus, and the southern Levant, perhaps maybe also connection with the church, with Christian production centers being involved. And what we also can say, being as modest as we can, we think that the significance of this shipwreck goes way beyond its construction detail, and we can learn a lot about economic activity and daily life on board the ship and generally in the Eastern Mediterranean during this period. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Debbie, thank you so much. That was a fantastic lecture. I certainly learned so much. And I'll start with the first question. So when I looked at your maps, I didn't see any points around Lebanon. And I was just wondering if, you know, over the past years, Israeli archaeologists are doing a lot of work on the Islamic periods. And I was wondering if with your work, this is like pioneering work on early Islamic ships. Do the neighbors reach out to you or are you able to talk with them? Do they have anything in places like Lebanon that relate to your work? And do they try to communicate with you, the researchers?
No. Unfortunately, no. It's a bit challenging at the moment.
Do they are they finding? Are they, like, I know Honor Frost Foundation has a big effort in Lebanon. Are they finding Islamic ships at all?
I don't know of any.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't know.
Somebody else have a question there? I'll go back to the rats while people are thinking of questions. So do you have is there a student that's focusing their research on this issue of rats?
Yes, there is a student, Sierra Harding. She completed her MA thesis with excellence. She studied all the faunal remains from the ship. And this is only a small portion from what she did. And currently we are focusing on establishing a larger database of comparison for these rats in order to publish this study of the rats themselves. Because we were only able to compare to collections which are available at the museum in Paris, and she went also to Holland. So for sure, we know that our rats didn't come from the United States because she compared it to a large collection she found in the United States. So they are not American. They are somewhere from the Mediterranean, but we would like to try and find out, is it really Corsica? Is it somewhere else, maybe Tunisia? Just to try and find out exactly where these two rats came from.
John, did you have a?
I do. I have a question, but first of all, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I've worked on shipwreck sites in California and in the Caribbean. I have never seen anything like this. And what strikes me the most is the preservation conditions. In shallow water, we rarely find ships preserved very well. So maybe you could explain how the preservation conditions are so extraordinary at your site?
I think the reason is the sand. The ship was, I assume that they jumped in the water to save themselves as soon as the ship, they understood that they hit the ground and were unable to move the ship. So they saved themselves. They took whatever they could. Perhaps some of the cargo was salvaged later. And it's immediately being covered by sand. We see also at the end of excavation season, we return a few days later and everything is covered by a thick layer of sand, which oxygen, it's an unorganic environment, so everything is well preserved.
That's fascinating. Well, great.
Yeah.
And it really is a dynamic situation because it's so near shore. I mean, I remember snorkeling out there to visit you, Debbie, and it's so rough. It's unbelievable that this stuff is still preserved.
Yes, it is. Also, the amount of organic finds, I didn't mention all of them here, but we have baskets and the woven matting and the amount of ropes and very nice knots in the ropes. So yes, it's impressive. And it's one of the challenges we have is how to retrieve everything and how to conserve it. So it also remains available for study and for future presentation.
So where do you conserve the wood? I mean, do you have a facility for conservation of the maritime materials?
Yes, we have a small freeze dryer and we specialize mostly, we deal at the moment with conservation of small items, such as the box, the ropes. A few days ago, someone asked me, why don't you retrieve the complete hull and conserve it and assemble it for display at a museum? And I said, where do I start? I do not have the place, the means to conserve a 20 meters long ship. And there is a lot of wood. There is so much timber there.
I think it's for people interested in Islamic history, and there's a lot of people out there, this could be a really interesting conservation project that it has potential to get a lot of interest, I think. Inshallah, as we say.
Yes, inshallah, I wish.
I see Shelley Waxman is here, which is great. Hi, Shelley. Shelley was our lecturer last time. And Shelley's done a lot of work in the Tantura Lagoon. What is did you find any Islamic period ships, Shelley?
Yeah, well, hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wrote a note to Debbie. First of all, congratulations on a wonderful lecture. And a lot of the things she was talking about just brought back memories when Jaak and I were excavating at Tantura back in the early 90s. For example, the char bending, we found that on the charring at the bow and the stern we found on the Tantura A shipwreck. And at first we thought there must have been a fire on board, when we first found it. And then we were fortunate to have Dick Steffi out there with us. He said that was char bending. And I think Tantura A still remains the earliest example of that. And then Tantura B, which is early 9th century, one of the things that I found interesting was the mix of Arabic and Greek, and we had Greek letters on some of the timbers, and then there was a little rondelle with a Arabic inscription on it. So the mix of the two, which really comes back to who owned the ship, right? Yeah. But well done. Thank you for a great lecture.
Yeah, who do you think, Debbie, who do you think owned that ship?
I didn't mention it earlier. We think there were about 8 crew members based on the handling of the rigging, and also a caloric calculation of according to the amount of food and other remains. So we think about 8 crew members. Perhaps the one who was who knew how to read and, well, at least how to write, the one holding the writing tablet, perhaps it was of Islamic origin, because the use of this kind of writing tablet was widespread during this time in the Islamic world. Others, we don't know. Perhaps a combination of Greek and Islamic, which is typical of the period.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know.
Amazing.
Challenging.
Oh, please. Come up.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Of course, knowing me, you'd probably guess the question I'm going to ask rather. It has to do with the anchors. I didn't see any anchors on board. They would have been iron, of the highest prized items on board the ship, so they must have been salvaged, which indicates that the ship must have remained exposed for a while for it to have been salvaged, and therefore probably cargo of amphors were much larger, and they would have gone with the anchors. But I would have expected seeing at least somewhere between 8 to 12 anchors on board the ship, and I guess you have none?
No. What we have outside the ship, I'll see if I have outside the ship, there is a very thick rope running along the ship. I think it might be an anchor rope, but we went excavating along, where is it? Here you see a fragment of it. It's much thicker compared to other ropes we found in the ship. So I'm thinking maybe it's the anchor rope, and if we go along it, maybe we will find the anchor. But since we are so stressed with good working days, we focus on the hull, and we haven't continued to try to expose here. We did a small trial with metal detector, but didn't find anything yet. And I agree, I was so looking forward to find an anchor. So it's somewhere there, I hope, at least one.
I have a second question with regard to the glass. It seems like all the glass broken pieces and the chunks of glass look like they are beach polished. So rather than representing factory waste, I wonder if they were sort of shoveled into the vessel along with the ballast, because the intact, or the once intact vessel that you shows no evidence of abrasion or being exposed. So therefore, those bits of glass on board the ship, the scrap pieces, must have been exposed for a long time on a beach before they were placed on board the ship.
Perhaps the ones which were found, we found the glass in 2 distinctive areas. One was found here in the bow, so perhaps with the ballast stones, it was abraded, but the other large group was found in this area next to the masthead, and it was found in woven baskets. More protected, like more nicely organized. Someone collected them and put them in the baskets for trade.
But even if they were collected for recycling rather than being factory wastes, it seems like maybe they were collected on a beach and then perhaps placed on board the ship, because that takes a long time for glass to be abraded like that.
Okay, thank you for this comment. I feared you might ask me about the framing pattern. Because
I was going to, but
I don't have an answer for you yet. I know I owe you the framing pattern and the rabbit in the keel. I don't have answers for these questions yet. But
what about any edge fasteners? I know you're still above, so that's a part that would not have any edge fasteners, but down below, any evidence of mortise and tenon joints or cokes? It's about that transition time?
Yeah, as far as I could see in the garboard where it's see if I have a nice photo where the connection to, sorry, here. Like in this area, as far as I could see the garboard from the outside, I could see only nails. I mean, I saw the concretion, I might say I broke a little bit of it and I saw only nails. So it could have been nails also just to reinforce the garboard in addition to caulks or mortise and tenon joints or something else, but we haven't been able just to arrive to this place to take these photos. It was a great success. So
yeah, at about this period, I would expect, but who knows? I'm really excited to have you get some results. There would have been a garboard, and the lower part, there would have been a rabbet, and the lower part of the garboard would have been directly nailed onto the rabbet without any edge fasteners or very few edge fasteners, but the edge of the plank above the upper edge of the garboard would have edge fasteners, presumably.
We will look for them. We only have evidence of 1 or 2 butt joints, but also in the upper timbers. So to understand what's going on in the lower timbers, as I said, there is still much more work to be done on this shipwreck.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got another question in line with what you were saying about, you know, there's more work to be done on this. Obviously, I mean, this is a treasure trove for the early Islamic period. I'm just wondering if I could ask you to dream, Debbie, if you were going to finish this project, what would your next big project be? What would you want to do?
I know what I want to do.
Okay, let's hear it.
And Shelley knows that too.
How about sharing?
As I mentioned, for me to go back to excavating Ma'agan Mikhael was a closure, because that's where Professor Yaakov Kahanov, my academic father, started his career. Mm-hmm. And I would like to go back to Tantura Lagoon and continue his work there. Before Yak left on his one-way sailing, he left me a list of things to do, things to complete, because he didn't have the time. So I have some questions to answer on his behalf in Tantura Lagoon, indoor Tantura Lagoon, yes. So that would be the next project. Exciting. And there is also a shipwreck I would like to excavate in Akko. So there is a lot to do, only a matter of time. Good. That's awesome. Anybody else have a question out there? I'm scrolling through the participants.
Yeah, sorry, Debbie. I kind of wanted to, I don't want to harp on the preservation, but I mean, it's obviously blowing a lot of our minds to see really insane preservation, especially in the Mediterranean. To me, it looks more like Great Lakes shipwrecks, you know, in the cold water. So, so it's really, really nice. But I guess one of the things that we were thinking about in terms of how well preserved, especially the wood and some of your iron fasteners that don't even look like they have concretion on them, unless you've done work on them underwater. So do you think, because you've described the high energy environment that you're working in and kind of the rough seas most of the year, do you think there was a somewhat different environment when it was you know, inundated and then buried underwater than there is now, just because of how high the energy is on top?
I don't think it was that much different. It's only 1,500 years ago. I don't think it was that much different. No, not the currents, the winds, more or less the same as today.
That definitely is amazing then.
Yes, it is. And also the fact that it was discovered and then reburied, and it took us a long time to try and relocate the site. It was a lot of effort, so yes.
Wonderful. Any other comments or questions out there? I think we're going to let you go to sleep, Debbie.
At some point.
Getting late. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. You got us all excited. I can't wait to visit Israel again and hopefully see you in the field. It's
September.
September, okay, we'll see. Bezrat Hashem, as we say.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Great. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you. John will be giving a talk when, Lauren?
March 13th.
March?
May 13th.
Sorry, May 13th.
Yeah.
May.
You didn't know, he already did it, yeah.
Yeah.